Matthew chapter 10, still uh, at, a, a, a part of chapter 10 that is at least not quite as problematic. And when I say that, I'm not saying that can't be right or that's not translated well, or it's just, there are things here that I have trouble figuring out for meaning that applies to me. I've said, I don't know how many times I'm glad I didn't try to keep track because it would have distracted me from what I really want to do here, which is provoke your thought on what Jesus said and what that would mean to you and me. Okay. So we're in verse 40. He who receives you receives me, and he who receives me receives the one who sent me. Okay. You're my representative. When you're received, I'm received. Anyone who receives a prophet because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And anyone who receives a righteous man because he is a righteous man will receive a righteous man's reward. Some people read into that what Jesus was talking about was an eternal reward, that there are levels of reward in heaven. There might be. There's some pretty smart guys who think there will be. I think I've shared this before. For me, the reward is heaven. Anything else? Okay, fine. But if you take that side, then if you receive a prophet, you get a prophet's reward. Which I have to think in terms of this levels of reward, they're pretty high up the scale. And if anyone receives a righteous man because he is a righteous man, you receive a righteous man's reward. Okay, that's up there too. Now, is there another way to look at that? I think there is. And that is it's eternal, but this reward may happen in time. Now, before I die and go to heaven. And by the way, Jesus who is he talking to here? He's still talking to the 12 apostles. I'll say it again. Yes, there are principles for us to draw from this, but these are not universal and unequivocal promises. Well, I think in terms of what the apostles would have heard was, as I send you out, and he's given multiple instructions regarding what they're to do, how they're to act, what kind of attitude he wants them to have. And here I think he's saying, you are, what he just said before this was, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And for me, finding my life by losing it, by yielding it, by giving it to Jesus, well, there is a reward in time for that. We think about the reward of a prophet. Well, there aren't very many prophets in the Old Testament who had a happy ending. Most of them were set in somewhat of an adversarial situation, because the prophets the true prophets of God were calling out sin. They weren't just saying, hey, I'm telling you, everything's going to be great. And I realize I'm not a scholar of the Old Testament prophecies. So take this with a grain of salt. I do believe, though, if in the present, in their current life, the reward for a prophet was being pushed away. What's the reward of a righteous man or person? First of all, what does that mean? Who's a righteous person? Well, a righteous person in its simplest form is a person who does what is right. It could be pressed, I suppose, to its extreme, where a righteous person never does what is wrong. I'm not so sure. As a matter of fact, for me, in my view of both what we have as the Old and the New Testaments, no, not really. The most righteous of people within what we have in Scripture were flawed. They had shortcomings. They sinned. So, but a righteous person is one, and I know this may be splitting hairs, and it may be softening it. Some people will view that. A righteous person is one who strives to do what is right. Again, these words were spoken before the cross. After the cross is a different, the dynamics become different. Before the cross, a righteous person was righteous because of their righteous acts, okay, the things that they did. After the cross, the Apostle Paul writes about this a good bit. We are made righteous because of the grace of God, because of the sacrificial death of Jesus when God opened the floodgates of forgiveness and grace. We are considered righteous by God because of Jesus and his righteousness. Okay, but for the apostles, the two categories of people that they would have most respected would have been prophets of God. That those, for Hebrew boys in Jesus' day, those were the heroes. Those were the people who the stories were told about. And the second category was people who did what was right, who set their mind to do what was right, and whose behaviors demonstrated that commitment. Okay. I think Jesus was just, am I wrong? Maybe I am, but I think this is because he starts out, whoever receives you receives me. In other words, Jesus was elevating the apostles to, status is maybe the wrong word, but I can't think of a better word, to the status of the prophets and righteous people. He goes on, verse 42. And if anyone gives a cup of cold water to one of these little ones because he is my disciple, I tell you the truth, he will certainly not lose his reward. You could take this literally, in which case they would always have wanted to carry a bottle of cold water or a wineskin of cold water or a jug of cold water. That's not, it wasn't a literal thing, but it was a word picture that I think still applies. I mean, this is a principle, but it was a direct promise to the apostles in their context historically. Someone gives you a cup of cold water because you're my disciple. They're not going to lose their reward. There is a reward in that. Okay. From the apostles' perspective, I think this would have been a kind of a backdoor way for Jesus to say, hey, don't take for granted when someone gives you a cup of cold water because you're my disciple. See it for what it is. This is an act of generosity, and there's a reward for that. Okay, we're back to the reward thing. If this is Jesus talking about heaven reward, a reward that will be given and experienced in heaven, then since none of the other writers of the Gospels or any of the epistles or the Revelation lay out anything more than what Jesus has said here, and your guess is as good as mine on, so what would the reward be? I don't know. If it is a heavenly reward, all I can say is, when it comes to heaven, it's all good. I mean, beyond just good. It exceeds our wildest imaginations. John the Apostle, when he wrote about it in the book of Revelation, he didn't have words to describe the wonder, the miraculous wonder of heaven. So, yeah. But I think there's another aspect of this for us to pull from it as a principle for us, is that generosity provides reward. The most joyful, best balanced, I mean, the people I most love being around are generous people. They're generous with their time. They're generous with their resources of money and service. They're generous with. They're just generous people. Do you find this to be true? Generous people, they make the best companions for traveling this road of life. And one of the blessings, rewards of generosity that I've experienced is when I am generous, when I give not grudgingly or under compulsion, as Paul writes to the Corinthians, I become less attached to stuff. This is very good. This is a reward. I want to steward what God has given me, but I'm only a steward. I'm not an owner. I can't afford to be attached to my stuff as if I were an owner. Generosity. Used to think, because I never have, there's not a wine, it's just a fact. In ministry, I was only in ministry, well, I still am in ministry with our open door library work, but if a person is going into ministry in order to become wealthy or well-heeled. That never happened for me. And I used to think I don't have much, so... But I've learned even when you don't have much and you are still generous, there's a reward. Okay, that's enough. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.